When we think about the start of the Civil War, we usually picture it as a clean break, North versus South. But the real story is so much messier. It's about a crack that ran so deep, it didn't just split a nation, it split states right down the middle. So let's start with the question. What if the very first casualty of the Civil War wasn't a soldier, but an entire place, a community, a state? Because that's exactly what happened. It all started with an impossible choice that one state had to make. And its decision didn't just push the country into war, it literally tore that state in two, creating a perfect snapshot of the entire conflict. Okay, so let's set the stage. Long before a single shot was fired, the nation was already coming apart at the seams. And at the very heart of it all was the institution of slavery, an issue so powerful it was pulling states like Virginia in two completely different directions. By 1861, Virginia was really a state of two minds. In the East, you had a powerful economy built entirely on plantations and the labor of enslaved people. But head west into the mountains, and you'd find small farmers living totally different lives, with very, very different ideas about where the country was headed. And all of this tension, this deep internal division, was about to come to a head. A handful of events, happening one right after the other, would force this fractured state to make an impossible choice. And boy, did things move fast. On February 13th, the Virginia Convention gets together just to talk about seceding. But then, bam! April 12th, Confederate troops fire on Fort Sumter. The war is on. Lincoln responds almost immediately, calling for 75,000 troops to put down the rebellion. All of a sudden, talking is over. The pressure is on. And just 2 days later, Virginia picks a side. It votes to secede. Now you have to understand, this wasn't just some abstract political debate. For people, it was deeply personal. I mean, look at Robert E. Lee. Here's a guy who's a decorated U.S. Army officer. President Lincoln himself offers him command of the entire Union Army. But for Lee, one thing mattered more. He was a Virginian. He actually turned the offer down, and his words just capture the whole dilemma perfectly. He wrote, "I cannot raise my hand against my birthplace, my home, my children." Right there in that one sentence, you feel that heart-wrenching conflict. He chose his home state over his country, and that single decision would change the course of the entire war. So Virginia decides to leave the Union, but the fallout from that decision was immediate, and it led to something absolutely dramatic, a brand new state, literally born from the chaos of war. You see, the delegates from the western part of the state were furious. They were not about to be dragged into the Confederacy, and the split was crystal clear. In the East, you had the powerful plantation owners whose entire world relied on enslaved people. But in the West, small farmers who wanted nothing to do with secession or slavery. Their loyalty was to the Union, period. So what did they do? They took matters into their own hands. Delegates from all those western counties met in a town called Wheeling, created their own pro-Union government, and then voted to form a whole new state. And what's wild is that in June of 1863, right in the thick of the war, West Virginia officially joins the Union. It's the only state in history to secede from a state that had already seceded. Just think about that for a second. Virginia's split did more than just create a new state. It basically turned old Virginia into ground zero for a whole new kind of fighting, what many people call the First Modern War. Once Virginia joined the Confederacy, the capital was moved to Richmond, and that was huge. Virginia had the largest population and the most industry in the South. Moving the capital there pretty much guaranteed it would become one of the main battlegrounds for the next 4 years. But this war was going to be different. New technology was a total game changer, and it made the conflict incredibly deadly. We're talking railroads moving huge numbers of troops, telegraphs sending messages instantly, and terrifying new weapons like mines, early submarines, and the first machine guns. But the biggest leap forward? That was happening at sea. And that revolution came in the form of the ironclad. The idea was simple but absolutely brutal. You take a wooden ship and you bolt thick iron plates all over it. What you get is a floating fortress that can just shrug off cannon fire, making basically every other navy in the world obsolete overnight. We saw these things in action for the very first time in 1862, right off the coast of Virginia. In the Battle of Hampton Roads, the Union's Monitor faced off against the Confederacy's Virginia. For hours, these two metal monsters just hammered away at each other, but neither one could sink the other. It ended in a draw, but the message couldn't have been clearer. The era of wooden warships was officially over. So, The battle lines are drawn, technology is changing everything. But how did the two sides actually stack up against each other? Let's break down the odds, North versus South.
Now, if you just look at the numbers, it seems like a total mismatch, right? The Union in the North had way more of everything: factories, railroads, money. They had double the people and a powerful navy. Their big problem? They had to invade and conquer a huge, hostile territory. The South, on the other hand, had way fewer resources, but they had two huge advantages. Their soldiers were generally more skilled, and they were fighting to defend their own homes, which is a powerful motivator.
And those advantages for the South were on full display at the very first major battle of the war, near a creek called Bull Run in Virginia. The result? A shocking victory for the Confederates that sent Union soldiers running all the way back to Washington. It was a massive wake-up call, proving to everyone in the North that this war was not going to be easy. It was going to be long, and it was going to be very, very bloody. And that really brings us to the final question, the one that hangs over this entire story. When a nation is so broken that states are literally splitting in half, when families are torn apart by loyalty, how do you ever come back from that? How can a war built on such deep, painful fractures ever lead to a country that's truly united? It's a question that, honestly, we're still grappling with today.